There was a time when neighbors looked out for each other, when a community meant something real, not just a word on a welcome sign, but a living, breathing promise between people. And what happened at a Family Feud taping in Atlanta, Georgia on a cold Tuesday afternoon in February would remind every single person watching exactly what that promise looks like when someone chooses to honor it. Because when a stranger stepped forward to help a little girl she had never met before, Steve Harvey stopped everything. He put down his microphone. He turned to the audience, and he said something that nobody in that studio would ever forget. Lily Castillo was 7 years old. She had dark brown eyes that were too serious for her age, the kind of eyes that had seen things a child her age should never have to see. She wore her hair in two careful braids that her grandmother had plaited that morning before school, tied with small yellow ribbons that were slightly frayed at the ends. Well loved like everything else in the Castillo household. Lily's mother, Rosa, was 29 years old and had been raising Lily alone since Lily was 3. Rosa worked the morning shift at a hotel laundry downtown, and the evening shift at a grocery store 3 blocks from their apartment in East Atlanta. On the days her shifts overlapped, Lily went to the neighbor's house. On the days they didn't, Rosa rushed home, changed her shoes without sitting down, and made it back out the door in under 10 minutes. She had been running that race for 4 years without stopping. Rosa's mother, Lily's grandmother, Elena, had come from Mexico with Rosa's father 30 years ago. They had built a small life in Atlanta, brick by careful brick, a church community, a garden out back, a circle of friends who shared food and helped each other move furniture, and watched each other's children without being asked. Rosa had grown up inside that circle of care and had believed, for most of her life, that the world worked that way. Then Rosa's father passed away. Then her marriage fell apart. Then the circle got smaller, as circles do when life gets hard and people get busy. And Rosa found herself doing what her mother had always told her never to do, carrying everything alone. Lily knew her mother was tired. She was 7, not oblivious. She drew pictures of Rosa at the kitchen table with a crown on her head, because she had decided her mother was a queen. She left these drawings on the refrigerator door, held up with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. Rosa had saved every single one. The Family Feud invitation had come through Rosa's church. A local coordinator was looking for families to fill last-minute spots in upcoming tapings, and Rosa's pastor had put her name forward without asking her first. Rosa had almost said no. She was exhausted. Lily had just gotten over a bad cold. The drive to the studio was 40 minutes each way, but Elena had told her firmly, "You go. You let that little girl see something fun. You let yourself have one afternoon that is just for joy." So Rosa said yes. What Rosa did not know was that the afternoon at Family Feud would change the direction of their lives entirely. And it would not happen because of anything Rosa did or said. It would happen because of a stranger sitting 3 rows behind them in the studio audience. The taping day was long. They arrived early as instructed, and spent nearly 2 hours in a holding area before being walked into the studio. Lily was wide-eyed at everything, the lights, the set, the sheer size of the room compared to what she had imagined from watching the show on their small television at home. She held Rosa's hand the entire time, not from fear but from the habit of connection. These two had learned to navigate the world as a unit, and that didn't stop just because the setting was exciting. Rosa's family team did not make it to the final round. They played well in the early survey but fell behind in the second game and were eliminated before fast money. Lily handled the loss with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old. She clapped for the winning family and asked Rosa quietly if they could still watch the rest of the taping. Rosa said yes. They found seats in the audience section and settled in. It was during the break between tapings, in that loose, in-between time when the floor crew was resetting and the audience was shifting around, that Lily started coughing. Not a small cough, the kind that grabbed attention. The cold that had seemed resolved came back hard in the dry, air-conditioned studio air. Lily pressed her face against Rosa's shoulder, and Rosa did what she always did. She rubbed her daughter's back, kept her voice calm, and quietly began calculating how quickly she could get Lily outside for fresh air without making a scene. It was then that the woman in the row behind them leaned forward. Her name was Margaret Osei. She was 61 years old, a retired pediatric nurse from Decatur who had worked 32 years in children's hospitals across the Atlanta metro area. She was at the taping with her sister, who had won tickets in a radio contest and needed company. Margaret had almost stayed home. She had a book she was halfway through and her knees had been bothering her. But her sister had been persistent, and so there she was. Margaret had heard that cough the moment it started. 32 years of listening to children's lungs had trained her ear in ways she could not turn off, even in retirement. She recognized the specific quality of it, the slight wheeze underneath, the way Lily's small shoulders lifted with the effort. She leaned forward and touched Rosa gently on the shoulder. "Excuse me," Margaret said quietly. "I don't mean to intrude. I'm a retired pediatric nurse. I just want to make sure your little girl is all right." She looked at Lily with the focused, calm attention of someone who had spent decades making children feel safe. "Sweetheart, that's a big cough. Does your chest feel tight?" Lily looked at her mother first, the way children look to their parents before answering strangers. Rosa gave a small nod. Lily turned back to Margaret and said, "A little bit. Like when I ran too fast." Margaret nodded slowly and looked at Rosa. What happened next in their quiet 2-minute conversation, held in low voices while the floor crew adjusted lighting around them, changed everything. Margaret asked careful questions about how long the cough had been present, about whether Lily had ever been tested for asthma, about whether Rosa had a regular pediatrician. The answer to the last question landed differently than Rosa had expected. She had a clinic they used for urgent care, a regular doctor, a consistent relationship. Someone who knew Lily's history and could catch things early was not something their schedule or their insurance had ever made straightforward. Rosa was not ashamed of this. She was doing what she could with what she had, the way she always did. But sitting in that bright studio, talking to this calm, kind stranger who was asking exactly the right questions, she felt something she had not let herself feel in a long time, the particular tiredness that comes from carrying something alone that was never meant to be carried alone. Her eyes filled. She blinked it back quickly. Lily was watching. But Margaret had seen that look 10,000 times in 32 years. She reached into her bag without breaking the conversation and took out a small notebook. She wrote something down, tore out the page neatly, and pressed it into Rosa's hand. "That is my personal number," Margaret said. "Call me tomorrow morning. I know a pediatric pulmonologist at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She is one of the best in the state and she works with families on payment plans. I can get Lily seen within the week." She paused. "You shouldn't have to figure this out alone." Rosa looked at the piece of paper in her hand. Then she looked at this woman she had known for 4 minutes. Steve Harvey, who had been walking back toward the stage from the wings, slowed down. A floor producer had quietly flagged him. Something was happening in the audience that he might want to see. Steve Harvey did not make an announcement. He walked over quietly, the way he moves when he is not performing but simply being a person. He crouched down to Lily's level first. At 7 years old, Lily was more important to speak to directly than any adult in the row, and he smiled at her. "Hey, what's your name?" Lily. "That is a beautiful name. You doing okay?" "Lily, I have a cough," Lily said seriously. "But the nurse lady is fixing it." Steve looked up at Margaret. Margaret gave him the short version in the quiet, precise way of someone who has spent decades communicating critical information clearly and without drama. Steve listened without interrupting. Then he stood up and looked at Rosa. "You came here today just for a good afternoon with your daughter," he said. "And you're still taking care of everything by yourself, even here." Rosa nodded because she didn't trust her voice. Steve was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Well, you don't have to do that today." He turned and spoke briefly to a producer. What happened in the next 20 minutes was not scripted and did not make it into the episode as it aired. But everyone in that studio witnessed it, and the story spread the way true stories spread, person to person, each retelling carrying the same core of warmth. The show's production team connected Rosa with their in-house resources coordinator, a role that existed specifically for moments when contestants or audience members needed support navigating health or financial services. Margaret stayed in the conversation, providing the specific medical context that made the referral meaningful rather than generic. By the end of the taping, Rosa had an appointment confirmed at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta for the following Wednesday. She had Margaret's number saved in her phone. She had the name of a social worker who could help her navigate Lily's insurance coverage for ongoing pediatric care. And she had something harder to quantify but just as real, the feeling that the circle her mother had always described, the one that had gotten smaller in the hard years, was not gone. It had just been waiting for someone to step forward and close the gap. Steve Harvey brought Margaret up to the stage before the final taping of the day. He did not make it a big moment. He simply introduced her to the audience as a retired pediatric nurse who had noticed a child in need and done something about it. "That's it," he said. "That's the whole story. She saw something and she moved toward it instead of away from it. You know how rare that is." He looked at the audience. Most people look away. She leaned in. That's the whole difference between a stranger and a neighbor. The applause was long and genuine. Lily from the audience started clapping too. The big, enthusiastic clapping of a 7-year-old who is not entirely sure why everyone is happy but is absolutely certain that happy is the correct response. Steve pointed at her from the stage and laughed for the first time all day in the way he laughs when something actually gets him. "See that little girl right there? That's why we do this." Lily Castillo was diagnosed with mild intermittent asthma the following Wednesday. The condition was entirely manageable. The pulmonologist, the one Margaret had recommended, said that with consistent care and the right preventive medication, Lily would be able to run and play and do everything other children did without restriction. She had simply needed someone to catch it. Rosa sat in the doctor's office and let herself cry, briefly and privately, in the small bathroom off the waiting room, before she went back out to sit with Lily and hear the plan. They were tears of relief and something older than relief. The particular release of a weight you didn't know you'd been holding because you had been holding it for so long it started to feel like just the shape of your body. Margaret Osei became a regular presence in their lives in the quiet way that the best people become present. Gradually, without fanfare, as a source of steady warmth rather than dramatic intervention. She checked in on Lily monthly. She helped Rosa understand her insurance documents. She introduced Rosa to a network of other single mothers in Decatur who had built exactly the kind of circle that Rosa had been missing. Practical, reciprocal, honest about difficulty and generous with support. Elena, Rosa's mother, called Margaret after their first meeting and thanked her in the formal, gracious way of someone who understands exactly what a gift looks like and wants to name it correctly. Margaret told her that Lily had done all the work herself by simply answering the question honestly. That little girl told me the truth about how she felt, Margaret said. She trusted me immediately. That comes from how she was raised, Elena cried. She did not tell anyone this except her church group, who prayed for Margaret by name from then on. The Family Feud episode aired months after the taping. Rosa and Lily watched it together on the same small television where Lily had first seen the show, eating the popcorn that Elena made on the stove in a pot the old way, with oil and salt and a lid that rattled when the kernels were ready. The segment that made it to air was brief, a mention of an audience moment during the closing, but Steve Harvey's words were included in full. Most people look away, he had said. She leaned in. That's the whole difference between a stranger and a neighbor. Rosa had that sentence written on a piece of paper, taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet where she kept the coffee. She read it every morning. Lily drew a picture of Margaret the week after the taping. She drew her with large hands, because Margaret's hands had been warm on her back when she was coughing, and with a stethoscope that was longer than her body, because Lily was working from imagination. She gave the drawing to Margaret at their next visit. Margaret kept it. She had it on her refrigerator for years, held up with a magnet that her granddaughter had given her. When people visited and asked who the woman in the picture was, Margaret said, "Little girl I met at a game show. She changed my retirement." And she meant it, because watching Rosa navigate those early months, watching her ask for help without embarrassment, accept support without apology, build something new from the resources she'd been given, reminded Margaret of why she had spent 32 years in pediatric nursing. Not for the dramatic saves. For the steady ones, the quiet catches, the early interventions that meant a child grew up healthy and whole instead of managing something that should have been found sooner. 2 years after the taping, Rosa completed her certification as a medical administrative assistant. She now works at a pediatric clinic in East Atlanta, not far from where she and Lily live, close enough that she can pick Lily up from school herself on most days. She had started the certification program 6 weeks after meeting Margaret, on Margaret's specific encouragement and with a reference letter Margaret wrote without being asked. Lily is 9 now. She plays soccer on Saturdays. Her asthma is controlled and unremarkable. The kind of things she mentions matter of factly when a coach asks about medical history, the kind of thing that is simply part of her information rather than a source of worry. She still draws pictures, and her mother still keeps them on the refrigerator. The pineapple magnet is still there. Margaret retired fully 2 years after the taping, truly retired this time, without the informal consultations and phone calls that had characterized her first retirement. But she made one exception. She remains available to Rosa by phone always. This is not a burden. It is, she has said, one of the most straightforward decisions she has ever made. Steve Harvey spoke about the moment in a longer interview the year following the episode. He was asked what the most memorable audience moment of his tenure on the show had been. He did not hesitate. There was a retired nurse, he said. She didn't know that family. She had no reason to get involved. She was there for the show, just like everybody else. But she heard a child cough and she moved toward it. He paused. I've been on television a long time. I've seen a lot of things staged and a lot of things performed. That was neither. That was just a person being a person. That's the hardest thing to find and the most important thing there is. The season that episode aired, Family Feud received more letters from the audience than any other season in its recent history. Not about the game, not about the prizes, about that one moment, described in dozens of different ways by dozens of different viewers, but always circling the same center: a stranger who leaned in instead of looking away, a little girl who told the truth about how she felt, and a mother who let herself be helped. Lily knows the whole story now. Rosa told her the real version, not simplified, not softened, on her 8th birthday, because she believed her daughter was old enough to understand what had happened and why it mattered. Lily listened carefully, the way she listens to things she wants to keep. When Rosa finished, Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So Margaret came to the show for the show, but she was really there for us." Rosa said yes, that was exactly right. Lily nodded slowly, with the gravity of a child who has understood something real. "I want to be like that," she said. "When I grow up, I want to be the one who leans in." Rosa pulled her daughter close and held her for a long time without saying anything, because some things do not need to be added to. They are already complete.